The stone parade ground trembled from thousands of steps. The air was permeated with iron and sweat. In the ranks stood men who were to go against barbarians, whose swords were longer, bodies more powerful, and shouts louder. But it was precisely these short blades, only half a meter long, that decided the fates of continents. Why did a weapon which seemingly yielded to almost all others become the main instrument for conquering half the world? And what was hidden behind this simple piece of steel, piercing into the history of humanity like into the flesh of an enemy? The answer is hidden in the Roman gladius, a weapon that changed the very idea of war. The Romans did not just fight, they created a system. According to Polybius, legionaries were not a mob, but a living mechanism, where every detail had its place. Their short sword was called a gladius, from the Latin gladius, which meant sword. But unlike barbarian blades, it did not chop, it stabbed. The gladius was not a symbol of strength, but a symbol of calculation. Its length was approximately 50 centimeters, its weight about 800 grams. Too short for a knight's swing, but ideal for a precise thrust to the heart. Imagine a moment of silence before the battle. The front line of the legion lowers huge rectangular shields, and beneath their edge, like serpent tongues, blades peer out. This is not a chaotic slaughter, but a cold-blooded ritual, a step forward, a stab under the rib, a step back. Thus, the Romans transformed the battlefield into a factory of death, where every second was a movement of a finely tuned mechanism. This formation was called a manipulus. 20 years before our era, the historian Livy wrote that it was precisely the manipular formation that allowed Rome to withstand the onslaught of enemies, outnumbering it many times over. 3 lines of infantry, Hastati, Principes, and Triarii, moved like waves, replacing each other. Each wave left behind only dust and bodies. Archaeological finds confirm. Under Carthage, under the German Wald Forest, and on the eastern borders of the empire, dozens of gladii were found. Short, bent from time, but still sharp. The metal, forged from Spanish steel, withstood incredible loads. The Spanish type, Gladius Hispaniensis, became the standard because it combined strength and balance, allowing for a thrust without loss of control. A Roman in armor carried with him not only a sword, but also an entire philosophy of war. Unlike the barbarians who fought for glory, he battled for order. His blade did not gleam in the sun, did not sparkle with decorations. It was like Rome itself, strict, functional, invincible. When the wind blew sand off the bodies of fallen enemies, the gladius remained sticking out of the ground like a sign of power, short, silent, but absolute. And it was at this moment that the main military revelation of antiquity was born. To conquer chaos, one needs a weapon no longer than an outstretched arm. But the strength of the gladius was not only in the metal. It lived in those who held it in their hand. People who trained every morning on wooden dummies struck not for fury, but for rhythm. They honed not strength, but precision. They were called miles, a soldier, a man of duty. And this duty determined the future of the empire. The secret of the Roman sword was not in the steel or in its form. It lay in how it was used, in the ability to turn a moment into an advantage. That is why the Roman gladius became not just a weapon, but an extension of human will. And when thousands of these short blades were first lifted into the sky above the Pyrenees, the world did not yet know that in a few decades it would be they who would decide the fate of Europe. In southern Spain, in the hot and dusty air of Saguntum, the clang of steel first sounded, from which a myth was born. It was here, during the Second Punic War, that the Romans first encountered the weapons of Iberian mercenaries: short, sharp swords, cutting flesh with terrifying ease. These blades were shorter than Gallic ones and heavier than Greek ones. They entered the body like a knife into wet clay. The Romans were astonished. According to Polybius, the legions first saw a weapon capable of piercing a man to the heart with a single movement. Thus was born the Gladius Hispaniensis, the Spanish sword that became the heart of the empire. But before this blade found its way into the hands of every legionary, Rome had to understand it. Metalworking in Spain was considered the best in the Western Mediterranean. Local smiths used a special method of repeated forging, creating a flexible yet strong blade, capable of not breaking when striking armor. Roman masters adopted the technology and brought it to perfection. Every gladius was precise to the millimeter, a blade about 55 centimeters long, the point sharpened on both sides, the balance shifted towards the hilt for maximum control. This sword did not look intimidating. Its strength lay in how it functioned within the system. The legionary did not strike, he stabbed. The thrust went forward, into the exposed space between the shield and the enemy's body. A second and a short thrust decided the fate of the battle. Polybius wrote that the Romans fought not with fury, but with the cold precision of a surgeon. That is why enemies often fled, without ever understanding where death had come from. But for the blade to become an extension of the hand itself had to be forged. Training in Roman camps, castra, was a test of endurance and will. A soldier began the day with formation and marched 20 kilometers in full armor, a shield weighing 10 kilograms, a helmet 1.5, armor about 12, on his back, provisions, sapper tools, a pilum spear, and the gladius itself on his right hip. Why on the right? So that the arm pressed against the body could instantly draw the sword from under the shield, without exposing itself. Every movement was perfected, like the mechanism of a clockwork device. These men trained with wooden swords, heavier than real ones. Every strike was practiced 1,000 times. Romans believed if the body became accustomed to the weight, steel would seem light. They were taught not to chop, but to thrust, short, fast, almost without a backswing. This seemed simple, but in reality, it required ideal coordination in a dense formation, where every step and swing depended on one's neighbor. Thus, a Roman learned not just to fight, he learned to be part of a whole. The formation tactic in which the short sword gained meaning was called testudo, turtle. When the enemy showered the legion with a rain of arrows, the Romans raised their shields over their heads, creating a living shell. Beneath this shell, they advanced, step by step, until the distance was reduced to a single strike. Then the shields opened, and the gladii, like the claws of a predator, plunged into the enemy. For a modern observer, this can be compared to the coordinated play of a football team. Everyone knows their place. Every step is calculated. But if one makes a mistake, the entire formation falls apart. Therefore, in the Roman army, a mistake was a crime, and discipline a sacred law. For breaking formation, death. For desertion, crucifixion. Centurions, veterans of dozens of campaigns, ensured that a recruit did not merely hold a sword, but understood its rhythm. One such commander could walk along the line and, without saying a word, understand by a glance who was ready to die and who was trembling. The gladius tested not only strength, but also spirit. Archaeologists find wooden training dummies and sand arenas in old camps, indentations on their surface, traces of endless training. It was there that the Roman legionary was forged, transforming the short blade into a weapon of total war. When the warriors first went into battle with the updated gladius against Hannibal's army, the enemy did not yet know that they had lost. For now, the Romans fought not only with a sword, but also with a system. Their blades were an extension of tactics, their movements an embodiment of discipline. And every blow of this short sword brought closer not just victory in a single battle, but the birth of the very idea of empire, a world where order conquers chaos. The summer sun reflected off bronze helmets, blinding opponents, while the Roman lines slowly but relentlessly advanced. This was not an impulse, not the chaos of an attack. This was the march of a machine. In each manipulus, 120 men arranged in a checkerboard pattern with identical breathing, identical step, identical coldness in their eyes. When the Second Punic War reached its climax, Rome understood. The fate of the empire was decided not in the councils of senators, but by the length of the sword in a legionary's hand. The Battle of Cannae, 2016th year before our era, a day that became a symbol of defeat, but also of a turning point. Hannibal surrounded an army of 80,000 men, and the Roman legions perished almost entirely. It seemed all was lost. But it was precisely after Cannae that the gladius became not just a weapon, but a symbol of rebirth. Rome stopped imitating its enemies. It began to learn from defeats. Polybius wrote that only after terrible losses did the Romans understand that a short blade requires coolness, not strength. Now, every strike, every step of a legionary was honed with new precision. The centurion, commander of 100, became the embodiment of this system. He did not merely command, he went first. His staff, called a vitis, was not a symbol of power, but an instrument. With it, he struck the backs of those who lagged behind and raised the fallen. It was he who ensured that the gladius did not become a toy in the hands of a soldier. The secret of the gladius was that it did not fight by itself. Before each strike came the pilum spear, heavy, with a thin iron tip that bent upon impact, preventing the enemy from using it against the Romans. The pilum pierced the shield, and at the moment the enemy tried to pull it out, the legionary was already there. A step forward, a stab under the rib, short, almost silent, but deadly. This technique, described by Livy, became a classic of Roman tactics. The formation in which it was used was called triplex acies, the triple battle line. In front were the hastati, young, resilient. Behind them the principes, experienced, reliable. Last stood the triarii, veterans, the last line. When the first two lines grew exhausted, the triarii rose to their knees and entered the fray. Even their saying entered history. It has come to the triarii, meaning to the last chance. These three lines moved as if three waves of one sea. The first broke the enemy's formation, the second finished them off, the third secured the victory. The gladius was created precisely for this rhythm, short, fast, controllable. Its blade rarely broke. Archaeologists found examples with traces of dozens of sharpenings, but the metal remained intact. Spanish steel did not fail. Caesar would later write in his Commentaries on the Gallic War that the Roman legionary struck where the enemy least expected, under the shield or at the throat. This was precisely the genius of the gladius. It worked where long weapons lost their advantage. Compare this to modern sports. The gladius is like a short, straight punch in boxing, without a wind-up, without a showy swing, only the power of the moment. This weapon required not brute force, but concentration. Therefore, the gladius is not a sword for lone heroes. It is a sword for those who hold the line. But physical strength was only part of the equation. A legionary had to possess almost superhuman endurance. 25 kilometers of marching per day, with a load of up to 30 kilograms, sleeping on the ground, a ration, a handful of wheat, and a little wine. They built roads, bridges, camps, and then went into battle. This was not an army, it was a way of existence. On one of the stone slabs found near Nims, an inscription is carved, Gladius non dormit, the sword does not sleep. These words, perhaps, were a legion's motto, and this was not a metaphor. The gladius was always at hand, even at night, under a cloak near the heart. Dust, sweat, clang of metal. In battle, the gladius sounded like a short chord, a clang, a strike, a cry, a step back. Thus Rome moved forward step by step, turning each battle into training for the next. When the legions returned after Cannae, no fear or doubt remained in them. They marched toward Hannibal to reclaim their honor. And every legionary knew. Now his strength was not in the size of the blade, but in how deeply he was willing to plunge it into chaos to restore order. The year 119th before our era, a new threat loomed over northern Italy. The Cimbri and Teutones, gigantic barbarians with long swords and voices like the roar of thunder. They were almost a head taller than the Romans, and their blades were a full palm's length longer than the gladius. When these northern behemoths broke into formation, their blows shattered bones and shields. But it was then that a new army was born, the army of Gaius Marius, and the short sword once again proved that it was not the length of the steel that mattered, but the precision of its movement. The Marian reforms changed everything. Now every soldier was a professional, not a peasant who had taken up arms temporarily. Their armament became unified, standardized, and the gladius mandatory for everyone. It was no longer a symbol of the elite. Now it was a tool of the armored people. Each sword had a name, a mark, and a length of about 52 centimeters. Rome became an army of smiths and discipline. According to Plutarch, Marius's soldiers slept with their swords, ate with them, died with them. The gladius was worn on the right, so that the hand under the shield could deliver a blow in an instant. The soldier was trained not to raise his arm, but to thrust the blade forward, short and precise. The strike went from bottom to top, under the ribs, under the shield, into the abdomen. Silence and cold geometry. That is how a Roman killed. In the Battle of Vercelli, the Gladii decided the outcome of the war. When the Cimbri burst in, clattering their long blades, the Romans met them with a wall of shields. A short step forward, a thrust, an exhale, a step back. Their formation did not break. The barbarians swung widely, while the Romans stabbed closely. On the field where 120,000 people met, the air rang with shouts, but the Gladii did their work silently. Plutarch wrote that after the battle, the ground was invisible beneath the bodies, and the legionaries' swords stood in their scabbards, but blood still ran down their hilts. The term describing their battle formation sounded like a turtle counterattack, testudo. But this time the Romans also used another formation, a wedge, called cuneus. This was a living arrow, piercing the enemy's center. The Gladii moved synchronously, like gears, and each strike opened the way for the next. It is difficult for a modern person to imagine what this battle looked like. Not knightly duels, not heroic contests, just rhythm. Tens of thousands of identical steps, thrusts, breaths. The Romans did not feel like people. They were part of a machine. Even the smell of war, a mixture of blood, dust, and metal, was part of this machine. Archaeologists found a battle site in northern Italy where dozens of blades lay among the bones of humans and horses. On some, dents from axes, on others, traces of multiple sharpenings. The steel of the Gladii held up when the barbarians' armor tore from the strain. After the victory at Vercelli, Rome became unshakable. The legionary was now not just a fighter, but a symbol of a system where every cog worked towards a common goal. Their training camps, castra, appeared in every province, and with them the gladius spread. From Hispania to Gaul, from Gaul to Britannia, from Britannia to the eastern provinces. When the warriors crossed the Rhine and first entered Germanic lands, the gladius became a symbol of order, carving its way into the chaos of the northern forests. But these forests answered. There, where space compressed between tree trunks, long swords lost their meaning, and the short gladius once again became king of close combat. Tacitus would later write that the Romans fought as if the walls moved by themselves. However, not everything was so simple. Historians disagree in their assessments. Some believe that the gladius reached perfection precisely in the era of Marius, others that its heyday came during the time of Augustus. But one thing is obvious: by the end of the 1st century before our era, the gladius had become more than just a weapon. It became a symbol of power. On bas-reliefs, on tombstones, in the hand of statues of legionaries, everywhere the short sword, slightly tilted forward. When Gaius Julius Caesar led his legions across the Rubicon, behind him marched men whose gladii had already conquered Gaul. These swords were not adorned with gold, but their thrusts decided the fates of kings. At that moment, when Caesar uttered, "The die is cast," the world already knew. Iron, knowing no doubt, followed him. And in every hand raised to the sun, the same blade gleamed, short, concise, but unconquerable, like the very idea of Rome. The dust of Gaul settled on bronze helmets, and the sun reflected off the blades, as if the very earth glowed with blood. The year 51 before our era, Roman legions under the command of Gaius Julius Caesar surrounded the fortress of Alesia. Inside, Vercingetorix, the chieftain of the Gauls, and 80,000 warriors. Around them, the Romans, 25 legions. Between them, a ring of walls, earthworks, and palisades, behind which the short blades of gladii were hidden. It was here, among the hills and smoking bonfires, that the gladius showed its true purpose: to be a weapon for victory in impossible conditions. Caesar wrote that his legionaries could not afford long swords. In the narrowness of ditches and ramparts, there is no room for a swing. There the hand acts, not the shoulder. And in these words lies the essence of the gladius. It was created not for a knightly duel, but for a battle where man and earth merge into one. An angled strike, a thrust, a step back, all in a metric rhythm, as if battle is labor, not combat. By the time of the Gallic Wars, the gladius had taken its final form, the Mainz-type gladius, a wider blade, a thickened base, weighing about 900 grams. It retained Spanish sharpness, but became more convenient in close combat. Caesar's legionaries used it together with the heavy scutum shield, rectangular, curved, almost chin-high. When the legion formed a dense front, these shields created a wall, and the gladii, spikes beneath it. Polybius noted that no enemy could withstand such a formation for longer than a few minutes. The Roman stands silently, like a stone, but when he takes a step, the earth trembles. Gauls, Franks, Germans, all were accustomed to wide swings. They struck from top to bottom, hoping to cleave the opponent in half. The Roman struck forward, under the shield. His blow was almost invisible, short like a breath, but decisive. The battle at Alesia lasted 2 days. Barbarians stormed the Roman fortifications wave after wave, and each time it seemed the Roman line would falter, short thrusts of gladii flashed from beneath the walls. One historian later wrote, "The Romans did not fight. They moved like a living organism, where every hand knew where to plunge the steel." But the gladius was not only a weapon of killing, it became an instrument of survival. Legionnaires used it to cut branches, dig earth, prepare food. It was a part of daily life, like a spoon or knife for a modern soldier. In archaeological camps in Gaul, blades with blunted ends are found, clearly used for work, not for battle. For a Roman, the gladius was an extension of the body even in peacetime. After the Gallic Wars, the gladius became a symbol of Rome's power over conquered peoples. Every time legions entered a new city, eagles, the symbol of the legion, were carried ahead, and next to them gleamed the short swords. Even when Caesar triumphantly entered Rome after his victory, the legionaries' gladii reflected the torches, as if warning, the empire would stand not on gold, but on iron. However, Caesar himself understood the strength of the gladius lay not only in the ability to kill, but also in the discipline of its wielder. He wrote, "Rome conquers not with weapons, but with order." In these words lies the essence of the entire Roman war machine. The gladius was not just a sword, it was a measure of character. Every soldier knew, if he faltered, the formation would collapse, and with it, all of Rome. After Caesar's assassination, gladii were once again stained with blood, this time in civil wars. At Philippi, at Actium, at Mutina, Romans killed Romans, and the short sword, created to conquer the world, turned against its creators. But even then, it remained the same, straightforward, honest, uncompromising. When Octavian Augustus became the first emperor, he did not abandon the gladius. He only changed the meaning of its use. Now this sword protected, rather than conquered. It became a symbol of Pax Romana, the Roman peace, which rested not only on laws, but also on the memory of those who held this piece of steel in their hand. And yet, in its point, the shadow of past battles still lived, because every gladius held the imprint of the hand of one who once stood in the dust under Alesia and knew the whole world could be conquered if in hand there was a short sword and an iron will. Rome became an empire. A world built on blood now rested on fear and order. But the gladius did not disappear. It lay at the hip of every legionary standing on the distant borders, in the reigns of Britannia, in the sands of Syria, on the Rhine and Danube. Its form became slightly simpler, shorter, the Pompey-type gladius, less elaborate, more functional. This was no longer the weapon of a conqueror, but an instrument of the imperial mechanism, the sword of a guard. The first decades of the empire passed under the sign of peace. However, it was during this period that the gladius acquired a new meaning, a ritualistic one. It became a symbol of legionary honor. When taking an oath, legionaries touched their blade to their chest, swearing to protect Rome and the emperor. Even on the gravestones of the fallen, the gladius was depicted not in battle, but at rest, sheathed, blade down, as a sign of duty fulfilled. Historians find dozens of gladii in camps in northern Britannia, near Hadrian's Wall. They are strikingly uniform. No precious decorations, no individual patterns. Everything is standard, like the breath of an army, where the personal is dissolved into the collective. But it was precisely in this that Rome's strength lay, anonymous discipline. Gradually, the short sword began to give way to a new type, the spatha. Longer, heavier, adapted for cavalry. It allowed striking from the saddle and reached the enemy further. But the gladius did not disappear instantly. For a long time, it remained in service. In garrisons, on patrols, in rituals. It became an archetype, the ideal form of close combat weapon. When the empire was crumbling under the onslaught of Goths and Persians, the old blades still gleamed in the sun. They outlived their masters, emperors, and even Rome itself. Archaeologists find them in the ruins of Vindolanda, under the ash of Pompeii, in the sands of Egypt. Everywhere the same silhouette, a straight blade with a rhomboid point, as if the metal itself remembered order. The gladius did not die on the battlefield, but quietly, along with an era. But its spirit did not disappear. Every short bayonet, every officer's dirk, every military ceremony carries its shadow. In it, the essence of Rome, coldness, discipline, expediency, not an extra centimeter. And so, when today we see a Roman sword behind museum glass, it seems to be sleeping. But look at it longer, and you feel that inside, beneath the rust of centuries, steel still lives, accustomed to the breath of a legionary and the rhythm of steps on a stone road leading to eternity.